thank you for joining us for the Talking Social Responsibility session. I'm Amanda, Sectors and Communities Manager at ACCA. This session follows on from the session that we've just been part of, and this will be talking again about social responsibility and the role of the finance profession. It's a bit more of an interactive session, so we're really looking to get your thoughts and share your ideas amongst the group. So please do contribute. You can join in by coming off mute and talking about what the points that you want to make, or you can also use the chat function and type those in there. There's just a couple of housekeeping points on the screen to share with you. So please do pop yourself on mute until you want to come in to speak. And when you do want to come in to speak, just use the raise your hand function to highlight your box yellow and let us know, so that gives everybody the opportunity and we don't miss anybody out. And we really love everybody to stay connected. So please do share your LinkedIn profiles in the chat in between. But over to Clive, who will be leading this session for us. Thanks, Clive.
Okay, thanks, Amanda, and thank you all for joining the second part of the session. And yes, I guess open to comments, thoughts, observations. We gave you quite a lot of, I hope, interesting points from the discussion in the past hour. I would really love to hear what you all think about that journey and how it matters to you, and any ideas and observations that you've got from what I and the panel talked about. So anybody want to come off on mute, or shall I go on, Gordon, kick us off?
Hi everyone.
And then we'll come to Nigel.
I'm Gordon,
Yeah.
Sectors and Communities Manager at ACCA, and I cover financial services and Scotland. I think the interesting point for me was about, I think it was maybe Donna that raised this as part of the discussion, that there is this difference between the short-term decisions that have to be made in order to try and ensure social responsibility, which in some cases can cost money and in some other cases can maybe be unpopular, and the long-term goals which are required for us to actually have businesses and jobs and places to live in the future. I'd be interested to hear how people think they would want to go about influencing others in those kind of discussions. How do you go about making sure that people actually do understand that there's a trade-off to be had here, and we can't have the second great option without having to go through the slightly more expensive option just now?
Yeah, that balance of short-term and long-term, as Donna said, also the impact of the current economic climate, making that journey actually quite difficult to undertake. Yeah, any thoughts, anybody? Nigel, you've got your hand up.
It was a sort of link point really to Gordon's, which is that what impressed me from the discussion was that emphasis on values, because where do you start? You start with a conversation with the organisation about whether this really matters, because that was the way that I think one of the participants talked about releasing time and money and changing focus. Otherwise, I think it's a danger. It's just seems an extra burden or something we just have to do, which doesn't mean or carry through to the bottom line, or in this case, I'm trustee of a charity, so it's charity's values. So I think if you start there, then the part Gordon was talking about trade-offs might become easier. Thanks, Clive.
Mm. And that sense of recognizing that the investment you make at the moment may in fact accrue some years down the line, but you've got to start somewhere and you've got to start with an action plan. Otherwise, the more we put it off, the harder the action plan becomes. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts from anybody? I mean, Donna, we talked about the operationalizing of this to some extent, but we didn't dig really into, does this actually, to Nigel's point, look at your long-term investment plans and how you emphasize that balance. Any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, so for anyone that doesn't know anything about Park Dean Resorts, we're a private equity-backed tourism company, so we look in travel and tourism sector. So there is constantly a battle for us, because obviously most private equity companies are looking probably at 5, maybe 7-year investments. Most of them aren't looking long term, and obviously they are looking always at getting a return on their initial investment. So I think it does drive from the top. So if you can get a private equity backer or a strong exec company who genuinely believe in this journey, it becomes a lot easier to push yourselves on those journeys. When your private equity backer is very much on the line of profit first, it does become quite a challenge to kind of bring them along on that journey to believe that actually, it is really important that we do move. And for us, it has been around saying, no, if you do not invest in ESG within our company, the reality is the company will not be a going concern because it is that important. So I think you have to look at what the area that your company works in, the sector that is, and say, is there any way that I can use that, kind of try and push that agenda forward? So looking at where does the ESG immediately touch to start on that short-term journey, which will then, I think, naturally start to develop. I think once the company starts on its journey, it becomes a lot harder to get off that train.
So, but if I interpret what you said correctly, that part of what you've been needing to do is educate the private equity house about why this matters and this balance between the earnout and the longer term sustainability post the earnout, because they can't effectively sell it on if the journey isn't there. And I've heard that from quite a few people at the moment around this agenda. It's actually quite a challenging one to communicate and articulate well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you do have to convince them that the reality is that investing in this now under their ownership will ultimately get them a better price in the longer term when they decide to sell.
Yeah. Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Clive. From a financial services point of view, I think this is a really interesting topic. I think we talked a bit about supply chains when we had the discussion earlier on, but from a maybe more manufacturing point of view, from the financial services point of view, we've seen big organisations, even just this week, come under fire for not the emissions that they're producing, but the environmental and social problems that are coming as a result of the companies that they are indirectly financing. I wonder, Dora, how much pressure have you had from the financial services people that you work with, the private equity people, to be more ESG focused? And if the answer is not very much, should how much should we be asking people to put on when they're investing in organisations?
So I think so Onyx, who back us, I think over the last kind of year or so, they've have kind of realised that this journey is necessity. I mean, Onyx are a Canadian-based company, so they don't really understand the UK market probably as well as if we had a British based private equity backer, and most private equities do tend to be global, they don't tend to be UK based. So for us, it has been, I suppose, a bit of a journey from both sides, from Onyx understanding why it is important that we do so, and understanding especially the challenges we face as a small island within the world, especially the coastal challenges around more the environmental side than the social. But I think the reality is that private equity backing is very much at the start of this journey. They are not they're starting it, but it's kind of been a hard war, I think, to get there. But yeah, I think that the reality is it is becoming more of a focus, I think, especially because we are seeing a generation now coming through the workforce who are hugely social and environmentally motivated versus probably the generations that are currently running these companies. And I think the social pressure that's coming up from them from the bottom is driving that change. So I do think we will see a huge swing probably within the next 4 or 5 years as we start to head towards that 2030 deadline, that it won't become something that you just kind of that greenwashing, blue washing side of things where you're doing to tick the boxes. It will become something that we all actively want to contribute in, and therefore will become naturally part of the strategies going forward in these companies.
So a couple of comments come from the chat. Yuanda has highlighted her view that management sets the tone from the top and cascades the same across the organisation, and they also make the resources available to show their commitment, which I think is true, but also something Donna said a moment ago about the younger generation creating a power momentum upwards is also a factor that organisations need to think. It's about, I don't like the phrase, but this almost reverse mentoring of people actually working across the organisation more collaboratively. So there's a perspective there. And Nigel's put a comment in about something Gordon said about raising the bar. Nigel, I don't know if you want to sort of explain or articulate your comment.
Yeah, where I'm coming from is we've seen with, for example, the CBI, how it wasn't to do with the CBI's lobbying on behalf of its members, but conduct around the way it did business with its staff that had quite significant implications for that organization. And that became amplified because of the impact of social media, the engagement of press and media. So that in a sense, the marketplace has become more challenging for companies and charities where momentum is gathered in social media and putting the spotlight on you. So having an ability to answer about your values and why you made those decisions, ESG, if you like, perhaps is more important than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago. I took my first job in the 1980s. The internet was very new and transparency was very low. Now, if you'd like to see your charity's accounts, if you're a donor of it, income over 25k, just call it up on the Charity Commission's website. It's there for you to view whether the charity likes it or not.
But it's also the immediacy of social media, isn't it? That sense of creating the storm, but also the ethical bar that we are setting as a society of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable as well. So there are a lot of dynamics changing there. Jabuzo, I don't know if you have something you want to add to the conversation at this point from your charity lens.
Yes, absolutely. I think I agree with you, Nigel, in terms of the pressure brought about by social media or the immediacy and the availability of information. It makes such a difference to the approach because it doesn't just highlight when there are issues. It also gives you an opportunity as well to showcase what you do. I mean, a lot of what we do, we use social media, we use Facebook. We are increasingly using Facebook to illustrate what we mean by our values within Vibrance. And I think social media has a bite to it, but it also has an opportunity. And so we do try to demonstrate as a charities in general would want to demonstrate what they do, and therefore that means maximizing the use of social media, not just as a tool for showing what you do, but a tool for attracting people to the charity, whether you're talking about from the position of donors, right? Saying this is what we're about, this is how we deliver, these are the outputs we are doing, these are the people whom we've impacted on. So you're using that to attract people to work for you. You're using that to get the donors on your side. You're using that to illustrate to the services, those who use your services or who we deliver services to, about what we are all about, and therefore what we can do for them. So I think there's a lot going on out there with social media, which I think helps. But I think being able to showcase what you're about and being able to show the social value and sustainability of your approach, I think it's definitely a help.
Brilliant, thank you. Given that this session in breakout is about talking about the social responsibility and whether organisations are moving in the right direction, I just wonder, maybe using thumbs up, how many people actually feel that their organisations are putting enough emphasis or effort into this area? Is it part of the strategy discussions? Is it part of the performance management discussions, or is it something that's simply ignored? So if you feel that your organisation's on the right way, do you want to sort of use the thumbs up reaction, and we'll see how many people we get, which might give us a very crude benchmark of how near or good we are. So I've got one thumbs up, I've got 2, 3, and there are about 50 of us on this call. So that suggests to me, in a very rough measure, that we've a long journey to go. Do people want to put in a chat or come on screen what they consider the barriers that need to be overcome are? Why are we getting only 2 of the 50 actually saying we're somewhere down the journey? Does anybody have a view on that? Either put it in the chat or raise your hand and come on screen. Chibuzu.
Yes, by putting my hands up doesn't mean I think we're doing it well. You know, I think we're
No.
nowhere near.
The phrase was on the journey.
I think we are on the journey, but one, I think, as we, in the previous talk we had, where we're talking about the start of the journey, and I think Matt had mentioned something about people getting to go to understand what it means to start with. What does it mean? What is this all about? For a lot of people, it's, I don't know. What does it. So I think getting the message out there, getting that basic understanding of what sustainability is, what is ESG all about, so that people have a core understanding of the basics. And then from then on, the small changes, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Let's say, pick your battle, look at what you're interested in, look at your interest, and then move on from that. So part of the challenge is not understanding what it's all about. And then how do you even start, in the first place? So I think just those tools out there, understanding the basics of it, and then looking at your core. What is it that you're all about? What's your passion? What's your mission? What's your vision? And then tailoring that to it rather than trying to do everything. I think that's where that becomes insurmountable and therefore makes it much more difficult to start.
And in the report, we offer a chart which gives a perspective of the dimensions, and we offer some ideas about how you might measure some of those dimensions. Use that as a checklist to say, where are we? What is it we need to do? Are we covering the right areas? Because some may be relevant, some may not be, but it might give you at least a start point on that journey to get you thinking about some of this. And I think that's the important thing. We all need to be somewhere on that journey. So, Nigel, you put a comment in the chat. I don't know if you want to articulate that comment again, or you want me to read it out.
Well, I just think in order to make this real, particularly if we're sitting in a lower level in organisation, in fact, some of the colleagues on the call is, well, this sounds good, but how do we make that happen? I think that it's come over, and I think Donna and a few others talked about earlier on around their conversations at board level, changing the focus, giving people permission to have a space in which to start. So I think it does start really from the top. It can't be done from the top of the organisation. It's a team effort. But unless you have that permission to start, then I'm not sure where you would be otherwise begin. I don't know what others think about that.
I think there is go on, Donna, please.
I think from my point of view, it's kind of mentioned on already, there is a huge amount of public pressure, I think, towards moving towards this journey now. And I do think that the boards are kind of not really being given a choice, because the reality is, as people become more socially aware and environmentally aware, their choices will become the same. So from both a consumer point of view of who they stay with, who they buy with, and also from a worker's point of view, is that many companies are struggling to hire because they do not represent the values of this new generation coming through. I think that it's going to become inevitable that the board can no longer ignore the subject.
There are a couple of comments that have come into the Teams chat. Rosemary asks, has the environment side of the agenda hijacked the whole conversation about ESG? Does it make social responsibility more difficult? That sense I talked at the very start about the three siblings. And Mike comments, I think that I think with ESG, the barriers to start a journey is being blocked by the understanding that the scope is relevant to the organisation. This was true for carbon footprints and CSR in the past. If I link both those comments, and maybe Chibuzo or Donny, you've got a perspective on this, what we see is the E and the S and the G separate, and the reality is they are causally interlinked. We can't manage one without the other. It's the same story about sustainability from the environmental, the social, and the economic lens. They're all linked. Do you feel that we sort of cope with the E because that's the one we created the noise about, and not understand that level of interdependency, not understand that cross-correlated risk between all three components. Donna, does
You
that?
want me to take that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there has been a lot of noise around environmental over the last few years. I mean, especially around the fact that, you know, when you look at the news and the media, environmental kind of has hijacked that side of things more than the social side. But I do think maybe a positive that's come out of COVID is that actually social is much more up there now than it was before. So I think that kind of that message and that concentration is changing.
But it's
The
in
reality,
interrelationship of
yeah,
the
there's
three, isn't it?
absolutely
They're
a
not
link, and
different
yeah.
things. Yeah.
I mean, if you look within Park Dean, obviously environmental is a huge element for us, but the reality is the things that we're doing at Ruda with Holly, who's our beach ranger there, you know, they have a huge impact on the local community, keeping that beach clean, keeping it free of debris and plastics. Gives a better beach for the community. It means that the community are more invested in our company as well, in trying to make sure that, you know, they keep us on the right track. So they ensure that not only do we look at things from an environmental point of view, which is having an instant impact on them, they then obviously want to come work for us as well, which is great because that gives the community impact and gives us the ability to then link into the S from it. So yes, they are absolutely interlinked.
And Chibuze?
Yes, and from my point of view, yes, you're right in that the environmental issues have been has hijacked the whole thing. But I think, remember, right from time there will always be this issue of child labor, slave labor. That's always been very topical. It's never really gone away. It's never been hidden. Think of the impact that was mentioned in the previous discussion, where a manufacturer was involved with something in Malaysia. Where was it in Asia about using child labor or slave labor? Think of the impact on their sales. So topic hasn't really gone away. It's always been there. And from the Vibrance point of view, we've always been about the social. For us, the social has been a very important aspect of sustainability for us. The environment has been there, but not as much as, because we're all about people. So that's been a difference for us. But yes, I think slowly there is a link. There's obviously a link because, as Donna said, for them, particularly where you've got the social and the environment all mixed with the physical place where they operate, you can't take away the fact that you live within a community and live within a space. And therefore, the impact of what we do affects the community and how we behave, like in Donna's case, where you've got the resort and the environmental impact is incredibly important. But even more important is how you deal with the community in which you live, what impact of buildings, of changing the roads and all this kind of stuff. So they've got to think about that. And so I think there is an absolute relationship. They're all interlinked. The E, the S, and the G are all interlinked. You can't have one without the other, or you cannot do one well without having to do the other as well.
And Matt mentioned earlier on that issues around fossil fuels and cars, etc. And he put it in the context of, well, what is it that we do with all those whose jobs are reliant on elements of the fossil fuel industry, from extraction through to servicing cars and anything in between. But equally, if you look at the electric cars, the fact that a lot of the minerals that are necessary to support the batteries have ethical issues about how we extract those, the societies they impact. This interconnected journey of, yes, we shall correctly move towards more sustainable vehicles, but actually we need to think about some of the rights of the workers in the extraction of the sustainable vehicles. That the manufacturer of solar panels is not necessarily an entirely ethical operation. There are issues there. So we need to think about some of these compromises in different ways and understand those strategies, because as Donna said, it is about the future and about the people we employ in the future and actually how we make that move forwards. Nicole said, should ESG reporting and transparency be made mandatory for organizations to report on similar such as annual reports? You are starting to see that happen with S1 and S2. if you are remotely involved in Europe, please do a risk assessment around the impact of CSRD, which firmly puts that reporting on the same level as financial reporting from 2024 going forwards. Yes, I think, Nicola, being appreciative of where that journey of reporting is going to take you is firmly part of the conversation. As a finance team, we need to understand and think about towards the future. So yes, I think in answer to Nicola's comment in the chat. Amanda, I think we're probably drawing to a close. Is there anything you want to wrap us up with?
Just to say thank you to everyone. It's been a really interesting discussion, and it's been great to have this opportunity to chat after the main session as well and get more people involved beyond the panel participants as well. So thank you to everybody that has contributed and shared. I'm sure it's been really useful to other people that have been listening and reading the comments as well. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to Clive for guiding us through the discussion as well, and do keep the discussions going. There are different sector LinkedIn groups for public sector, financial services, corporate sector, etc. So do find those on LinkedIn and join them. And yeah, please do keep your eye open for the other Ignite series sessions that are coming out this week. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.